USPAP page 236. Jurisdictional exemption rule continued. Number 112. Client requirement to disregard market value changes prior to effective date. Question. I have a question related to the implementing regulation 49 CFR Part 24 for the Uniform Relocation Assistance and Real Property Acquisitions Act of 1970, as amended the Uniform Act. The issue is the relationship of Standard Rule 1-4F and before acquisition value. The ASB has pointed out that such a situation does not create a jurisdictional exemption under USPAP, but is rather an assignment condition. My state has a similar law that requires the appraiser to disregard any decrease or increase in market value of the property prior to the effective date of value caused by the public improvement for which the property is being acquired. Does this state law cause a jurisdictional exemption under USPAP? Response: no. The state law does not cause a jurisdictional exemption in this case. USPAP Standards Rule 1-4F becomes applicable in an assignment only if the scope of work includes the analysis of anticipated improvements. When analyzing anticipated public or private improvements located on or off the site, an appraiser must analyze the effect on value, if any, of such anticipated improvements to the extent that are reflected in market actions. Bold, added for emphasis. The key word in SR 1-4F is when. Your state law does not conflict with USPAP because the word when indicates that SR 1-4F is only applicable in the circumstance that public or private improvements must be analyzed in order to develop credible assignment results. The jurisdictional exemption rule states in part, in an assignment involving a jurisdictional exemption, an appraiser must, number 1, identify the law or regulation that precludes compliance with USPAP. Number 2, comply with the law, that law or regulation. Number 3, clearly and conspicuously disclose in the report the part of USPAP that is voided by that law or regulation. And number 4, cite in the report the law or regulation requiring this exemption to USPAP compliance. Number 113, client requirement to disregard linking opinion of value to a specific exposure time. Question. I am aware that in the development of an opinion of value in which reasonable exposure time is a component of the definition, I am required by USPAP to develop of an opinion of reasonable exposure time linked to that value opinion. The assignment I am working on must, by regulation, comply with the Uniform Appraisal Standards for Federal Land Acquisitions, the Yellow Book. Those standards require that the market value opinion be based on a reasonable exposure time, but also prohibit the appraiser from linking the value to a specific exposure time. Does this prohibition represent a jurisdictional exemption, since compliance with the Yellow Book is required by regulation? Response: yes. In this case, the Yellow Book requirement imposed by the implementing regulation applicable to your assignment precludes you from complying with the USPAP requirement stated in the comment to USPAP Standards Rule 1-2C, which requires an appraiser to develop an opinion of reasonable exposure time linked to the value opinion when reasonable exposure time is a component of the definition of value. In contrast, the Yellow Book provides that the appraiser shall not link an estimate of market value for federal land acquisitions to a specific exposure time. Page 237. In accordance with the jurisdictional exemption rule, the appraisal report must clearly and conspicuously disclose the part or parts of USPAP that are voided by law or regulation, and cite the law or regulation which requires compliance with the Uniform Appraisal Standards for Federal Land Acquisitions. Number 114. Is a waiver valuation a jurisdictional exemption? Question. The Federal Highway Administration, FHWA, permits a waiver valuation, to quote 49 CFR 24.102 C2. The term waiver valuation means the valuation process used and the product produced when the agency determines that an appraisal is not required pursuant to 24.102C2, appraisal waiver. Is this an application of the jurisdictional exemption rule? Response: no. There is no jurisdictional exemption in the situation described. USPAP does not establish who or which assignments must comply. An agency may determine that an appraisal is not required for a specific situation and may elect to rely on a waiver valuation. Nothing in the definition of waiver valuation precludes the appraiser from complying with USPAP. Compliance with USPAP sometimes requires an appraiser to develop an expanded level of analysis or to communicate results with a different minimum set of requirements. distinct from what might be desired by a particular intended use or user. These additional obligations may impact an appraiser's decision whether they choose to accept the assignment. It is important that an appraiser take the time and effort to clearly understand all the assignment elements and make an appropriate scope of work decision that complies with the appraiser's obligation to be able to demonstrate that the scope of work is sufficient to produce credible assignment results. Number 115, client requirement to assume no contamination exists. Question: the Federal Highway Administration, FHWA, publishes a guide for preparing an appraisal scope of work. One of the items listed is that the property be acquired should be appraised as if free and clear of contamination unless otherwise specified. Is this a jurisdictional exemption, extraordinary assumption, or hypothetical condition? Response: this situation is not an application of the jurisdictional exemption rule. Rather, if contamination is an aspect of the valuation, the situation calls for either an extraordinary assumption or a hypothetical condition. In the definitions section, an extraordinary assumption is defined as an assignment, specific assumption as of the effective date regarding uncertain information used in an analysis which, if found to be false, could alter the appraiser's opinions or conclusions. A hypothetical condition is defined as a condition directly related to a specific assignment which is contrary to what is known by the appraiser to exist on the effective date, but is used for the purpose of analysis. If the contamination status of the property is uncertain and cannot be determined, an extraordinary assumption is appropriate. If the property is known to be contaminated, a hypothetical condition to the contrary would be required.